Gosh, so much was different before what happened at Pulse. It is the place I feel closest to the people who were stolen from me. It is the place that I can hear the last words we said to each other, that I can see their smiles, that I can feel their hugs. And so when it is desecrated by politicians, it is so incredibly offensive and hurtful. This promise that I made came at his funeral service, and it was right after I had this internal dialogue with God where I was so angry. I was full of rage. At the same time, was so compelled to want to do something to honor him. So it just sort of came out. I will never stop fighting for a world that you will be proud of. One bucket of black paint can't erase us. And we're going to take your assault on this memorial and make it a million rainbows across the state of Florida and across the country that you can never erase.
Hello and welcome back to the queerest podcast telling the fiercest stories. This is Queer Talker and I'm Ben Cicchetti. Before we get to my conversation with the inspiring and powerful Brandon Wolfe, I've got a very quick favor to ask. Wherever you are watching or listening to this episode, hit that subscribe button. It's one click that's going to make a massive difference. It's going to allow me to grow this podcast, and it's going to allow me to bring you the best and the queerest episodes every single time. So in advance, thank you. Now to my conversation with Brandon. Brandon, we will start with a little game I like to call Queer Panic. It's a rapid set of questions. You just respond with the first thing that comes to mind. Starting with, what was the first album you ever owned?
Oh my God, I think Mariah Carey's Greatest Hits. Is that a thing?
Nice.
Yeah, it was Mariah Carey of some sort, and it's because I stole it from my mom.
I love that. If you had to lip sync for your life, what song would you choose?
These are tough. What song would I choose? Marry the Night by Lady Gaga.
Amazing. We have a playlist where I add all these songs, so I'm thrilled that I now get
to okay, love that. Oh, good. Oh, right. Then I have to be really, really good with my choices.
Yeah. Who was a childhood celebrity crush of yours?
Posh Spice. Victoria Beckham, excuse me, but Posh Spice to me.
Yeah, everyone should know in this audience who Posh Spice is.
I certainly hope so, but if you don't, then you need to Google right now.
Yeah, educate yourself. What is your biggest red flag?
Being mean to service industry workers. Like if we're sitting at the restaurant and you're having an attitude with the person serving the food, it's not going to work for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. Where is your favorite place in the world?
This is so hard. I know you said rapid fire, but I'm politician adjacent, so I don't do rapid fire very well. I am gonna say, I'm gonna say Florida, and I know that is like a hot take, so everybody just bear with me with the hot take, but it is the first place I lived as an adult, and I lived there for a long time, and so my favorite place in the world is Florida. I wish it did better by its people, but still feels like home to me.
Yeah, that's fair. What is a queer movie that changed you?
A queer movie that changed me. Does the Spice Girls movie count as a queer movie?
It should do.
Yeah, it might be that. I feel like I don't know. Maybe it was more queer TV, like Queer as Folk. Will and Grace, obviously. I think some of those classics are what changed me. I'll never forget when I was a teenager. My best friend and I were still closeted, but, I think it was pretty clear to us that we were of the same family. And we watched this show called Boy Meets Boy, I think, on reality TV. It was horrible, but I think it was our way of coming out to each other. So queer TV generally was pretty formative.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Spice Girls movie is a classic. I don't care what anyone says. So I'm with you there. How about a queer book that you just couldn't put down?
So one of my favorite books of all time is called How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. And it was life-changing for me as a book to read as, not just a queer person, but a Black person living in America and living in rural conservative America. It was really powerful, and I actually had the chance to meet Saeed maybe 2 months ago and share with him what his book meant to me. And that was really special.
That's amazing. Yeah, I highly recommend it. We read it as part of a book club. Incredibly interesting, really, really informative read. Who is your ultimate queer icon?
Ultimate queer icon. This is so hard because I also think like maybe people are not queer, but they're still queer icons in a way.
We've had like Britney, Cher,
No,
kind of
you know
queer
what?
icons.
I'm gonna go with Whitney Houston. I think OG queer icon, but she and I have the same birthday, so I feel like we're spirit animals in some ways. Whitney Houston is definitely number one.
Yeah, incredible, incredible choice. Who is one person you would like to hear on this podcast, and what one question would you want me to ask them?
Oh my gosh, there are so many incredible people that I think I'd love to hear more from. One of the people that I consume a lot of content from is Hope Giselle, and I would love for you to have a conversation with Hope Giselle if you've not already. I don't know if I have a specific question I'd like for her to answer, but I just really appreciate her authentic, raw, honest takes on everything and her perspective as a Black trans woman in this country. She's a phenomenal human being. I love to hear what she has to say on things, and anything you ask her, she's going to give you an answer that is 100% her.
Amazing. Well, we will reach out and we will try and get her on the podcast. I think that'd be amazing. I'm going to pull on a thread that came from your book.
Great.
What does safe space mean to you?
I've spent a lot of time thinking about the term safe space, especially while I was in the book writing process, because as someone who grew up in a town that didn't look like me or love like me, I sought physical safety for so much of my young life. Um, and I thought that safe space for me meant some four walls somewhere or some, destination, some location. What I've discovered over the years is that safe space to me really means community. It really means, chosen family. And the safest spaces I've ever found are with people that I love and who love me in return unconditionally.
Yeah, that's amazing. I like that. And you talked about safe spaces and you talked about community. And I have this theory that to understand an LGBTQ plus person as an adult, you do first need to learn about them as a young person. So let's get a little bit deeper and explore Brandon a bit more.
Sure.
I obviously got a snapshot of that in your book, A Place for Us, which I listened to on Audible. Incredible read.
Thank you.
But for those that may not have read your book or listened to your book, what should I know about you as a child or a teenager to understand the Brandon that sits in front of me today?
Yeah, I alluded to it a little bit, but I am someone who is really spent much of my life trying to figure out what identity means. What does it mean to be me, unapologetically, fully, authentically, not to find, ways to shave myself down or fit into someone else's idea of who I'm supposed to be. And that's because I grew up in like I said, a town that didn't look like me, didn't love like me, didn't share a lot of my same lived experiences. And so I tried to find ways to assimilate into that community. And, and then I ran away and I tried to find, somewhere where I could explore what it meant to be fully, authentically, unapologetically me. I was, as I said, in part looking for a physical space to do that. But what I found was community. I found chosen family that allowed me to do that. I think folks should also know that, like I think many queer kids, I found an outlet in, performance and extroversion. I did, speech and debate. I did theater. I did music. I dabbled in sports. I wasn't very good at that. But I did a whole host of things. I did every after school activity. I ran for student body office every year I was in high school. And I was doing those things, I think, in part because I wanted to prove to people that no matter who I am or who I love, I can do all the things you can do. And I also think I was using it to seek out community. I was finding little, enclaves of safety throughout my childhood. So I guess maybe that's like a little snapshot into me. Certainly there are many more stories we could talk about if you want to go there, but I am an intersectional kid who's lived many lives trying to figure out, what it means to give yourself permission to be unapologetically you. And I'm really grateful that I've found that safety to be unapologetic around people who love me very much.
Yeah, and one of the things that came across really strongly in the book very early on was the importance of your mum and her as a safe space, but also as someone it felt like you could be your true, authentic self around. I think you told stories. She, took you to your first Spice Girls concert, which I'm all about.
There's a theme here, right? The Spice Girls are a theme here.
They come up a lot on this podcast. I don't know
They
why.
do.
It's maybe my bias. But how important was that relationship with your mum in kind of those early kind of informative years?
Yeah, what's so interesting. So I won't spoil the whole book for people, but my mom passed away when I was just entering middle school. I was sixth grade. So what's interesting about my relationship with my mom is that I didn't yet have the language to articulate who I was, and yet I could sense that she was an ally, a safe space for me, right? So I think the relationship with her wasn't about us overtly talking about, you are gay and that is fine with me. We didn't get that opportunity because she wasn't around when I came out. But I think our relationship still had so many of those components, right? She was the person who would tell me that I was special and perfect exactly as I am. She was the one who would come to my defense when other people were picking on me. She's the person who would be patient with me while I was working through, like whatever insecurities and struggles I was working through. And so I think, in many ways, my mom taught me what signs to look for when I finally found the language to articulate who I was, and I was looking for that same sense of safety and community. She's who taught me the language, to use and the signs to look for other safe spaces. And in a lot of ways, I'm a reflection of her. I told you, like, one of my first albums was, a Mariah Carey album, and it's because I took it from her. I will never forget, like, some of the most vivid memories of my mother. She was tall. She was like 5'11", almost 6 foot. She loved to wear these knee-high leather boots. She drove a 1960s red Mustang with red leather interior, and she only had like 3 or 4 cassette tapes in the car. Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Wilson Phillips, maybe Ace of Base once in a while. And so I have these like vivid memories of my mom with the hair blowing and her boot pressed down on the gas pedal of this Mustang, and she was blasting Mariah Carey. So in many ways, I'm a reflection of that today, right? Like her boldness, her audacity, her vibrance, all of those things I think I carry with me. And yeah, I'm honored that she taught me to be vibrant and bold.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And clearly, obviously she did an amazing job imparting on that. And clearly you've taken a lot from her. I think one of the things you touched on a little bit earlier on was growing up in a largely white conservative town. And you said you often felt like you didn't belong. Do you remember the first queer LGBTQ plus person you became aware of and how that might have shaped your view of yourself?
Oh, like in my actual life.
In actual life or in media, because I think those kind of early exposures through media are also super important.
Yeah, I struggle a little bit with the media component because, I think as a fairly elder millennial, like the queerness piece wasn't a sudden awakening. It was a gradual realization of, all the little breadcrumbs you'd seen throughout your life suddenly started to make sense, right? So I can't say with certainty that there was a moment when I saw a queer person in media and thought, aha, that is exactly what's happening here. But there were these little breadcrumbs along the way, like, when I would sneak watching Queer as Folk and feel connected to the characters. That was a really formative experience and helped me, I think, to escape to somewhere where I could see myself reflected in others. I remember seeing people be outwardly queer at school for the first time. There were very few of us, but there were a couple of people that I remember. I will omit their names from here in case they're not comfortable with that. But there are a couple of people that I remember that were very outwardly queer. And they were the first people I'd ever seen be brave enough to do that, right? The super skinny jeans, like longer hair, piercings, willing to like talk about the things they like to listen to, movies they like to watch, and not try to code switch. I think they were very formative for me. And then I don't remember if these stories made it into the book, to be honest, but there was an all ages nightclub in Portland, Oregon, which is near where I grew up. And we started sneaking there when I was 15, 16 years old, me and the other kids who would later come out as queer. A fun tangent is that the headlining drag queen was also a teenager around our same age, going to school near us, by the name of Jinx Monsoon, who obviously now has gone on to do really incredible things. But like those experiences were formative too, right? Sneaking to the Escape nightclub in downtown Portland, and watching Jinx Monsoon perform as a 40-year-old woman despite being 15, and thinking that the world was bigger than I had imagined it, that there were other possibilities out there. So again, it's a long way of saying I don't think there was one big moment, but there were these breadcrumbs along the way that now that I sit and think about them over time, I realize that I was building an awakening or an awareness.
Yeah, and one of the things that came across in your book, something that I was struck by, is someone who was kind of searching for themselves and a space where you could just exist as your authentic self from a very young age. When do you think you did first feel authentically yourself? And then when could you bring that authenticity to everything you do?
Yeah, this has sort of been a slow awakening as well, but I will remember. So, I grew up in this little town, went to a little high school. It's one of those where everybody knows everybody for generations. And so, like, if you can, you get out if you're not one of those people who fits the mold. So I went off to college and I thought maybe that would be it. And, I went to a state school like 2 hours from where I grew up. So it really wasn't all that different from my high school experience. And then when I was 19, I saw an ad for a job at Walt Disney, and I thought maybe this is my opportunity. I auditioned for a contract. I got offered a job like 2 weeks later, and I packed a couple of suitcases and I moved all the way across the country to go work at Walt Disney World. And I started to find bits and pieces of that authenticity as soon as I got to Florida, because what people may not know, one, is that everybody who works at Disney is kind of queer. So sorry if that's a spoiler alert for you, but it is a very queer place to be. And two, once I got there, I realized that a lot of the people who were, outwardly unapologetically queer in those spaces had also fled their little hometowns and went out searching for somewhere to belong. So, as soon as I got to Florida and I got into community with other people who were on a similar journey, I started to feel like I could be authentically myself. But it was really when I met my best friend Drew in 2014 that I first learned the power of being unapologetically myself. He from day one, from the moment we met, he was the person who challenged me to be, less apologetic about who I am, more confident in what I believe and the things that I love and the things that I don't like. He's the one who would be patient with me while I worked through my own insecurities. And I'll never forget, I did write about this in the book. I'll never forget getting angry at him because I was jealous that he had this other like fling that he was working through. And we sat in this Chinese restaurant that served vegan Chinese food in downtown Orlando. And he just let me word vomit all of it and cry and be angry and yell. And, I had done that before with relationships or friendships and watched them fall apart after that. And he let me get it all out before he said, so now what? Now we get to be friends, right? And it was that level of patience and willingness to like see me through all the other stuff I was working through, I think that really gave me permission to be unapologetically me.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think we all need those friends or those family members or whomever it might be that kind of do give you that a space to be yourself, but then also help bring it out in you. And you obviously mentioned moving to Florida, and your advocacy and campaigning work clearly started after you survived the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016. we're clearly going to talk about that and that night, but I want to talk about the Brandon before that night. So what were his hopes, dreams, and ambitions before, I'm assuming a change of course?
My gosh, so much was different before what happened at Pulse. I think the way I've described it to people is that I had stumbled upon a sense of normal that growing up I didn't know people like us get to experience, right? I saw other kids around me getting to experience normal, getting to dream of getting married and having kids and having a stable job. And it was a different time. I was in high school when states across the United States were banning same-sex marriage, including my own home state of Oregon. So like at that time, there was no American dream for me. There was no dreaming of getting married and having children, having a stable job. There were only so many jobs you could do and be out of the closet. There were, only so many avenues for you. And so when I, found myself in 2014, 2015, and early 2016 with this beautiful group of friends, this chosen family led by Drew, who pulled people together from all walks of life, when I found myself with a really stable job, my own apartment for the first time, a car that I owned for the first time and didn't stress about making the payment, like when I found myself in this normal life, I thought that was the point. That's the whole point of fighting so hard, is that you get to carve out your little sliver of normal and then you ride it off into retirement. So my dream was to keep being normal. My dream was to, at the time I worked for Starbucks, and I thought I'm going to move to Seattle and work at headquarters, and I'm going to have a little condo with a white picket fence in the front, and maybe I'll find somebody I love and we'll get married, and, we'll drive a mid-size SUV and have 2.5 children. Like, I dreamt of all the things that I had been told for my young life people like us don't get to dream of. And it feels like a lifetime ago. All of those things feel like a lifetime ago. But that's who I was. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to live a normal life.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important lesson many of us go through, is that realization that you can have that happy life, that you can find that kind of normal life, quote unquote. So I think it's really important that people hear that and have those people they can look at and see that it is possible. Obviously, many people know about what happened on that night in June 2016, but can you talk to me about Pulse as someone that never went? Talk about why Pulse mattered so much as a space, what made it special, and why was it such a loss felt across the entire community?
I really appreciate this question, because you can't fully understand what was taken from us in June of 2016 if you don't really understand why places like Pulse Nightclub exist in the first place. I talked about this journey that I went on to find safety, belonging, places where I could be unapologetically myself. And if I found that in, chosen family and people like Drew, it really manifested in physical spaces like Pulse Nightclub. Pulse is one of the first places I ever went and held hands with someone that I had a crush on without looking over my shoulder first. It's one of the first places I ever wore my skinniest pair of jeans without being afraid of what someone would call me. And I think it was that for so many people. It was a safe haven. It was a refuge for people. And remember that, this is an Orlando community where a lot of people sought refuge. And so to have that little space inside a community that's already been, created as a source of refuge for people, it really was a place where you could be whoever you wanted to be, love whoever you wanted to love, and nobody would bat an eye. And I think it dared people to be unapologetically themselves.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because I can think about my own experiences. I've talked about this on the podcast before. The first time a friend of mine took me to Heaven in London, and that sudden feeling of belonging and that sudden feeling of safety. And I guess that was the part that was shattered a little bit, right? Because we all felt we were going to these safe spaces, and then suddenly it wasn't a safe space. Was that the feeling for you? Was it the kind of that shattering of this illusion of safety?
I don't know if it was that for me. I think what I will say is I have a lot of respect and reverence for the fact that that is how it resonated with people. Because if you if you shatter one of our spaces, you shatter all of them, right? And I think that's why so many people have felt personally impacted by what happened at Pulse Nightclub. The same way that they have felt about other queer safe spaces throughout history being attacked and upended, right? I think for me, it was affirmation of what I'd always been afraid of, that there was no safe space for us. And the thing that I worried about in the aftermath of the tragedy is that it would do that for other young people, that there were young people out there who worried that it would never be safe for them to be out, that it would never be safe for them to go to a club or kiss a boy or, wear the clothes they want to wear, be who they want to be, that there was no safe space to do that. Pulse was sort of defiant in that way, that it said, no, we can be in, the middle of Florida and be exactly who we are and feel safe doing that. And when it was invaded, when it was shattered, it felt like affirmation of all the things that people are so afraid of. And I think, honestly, that's part of what led me to want to advocate in the wake of the tragedy, because I didn't want that to be the message. I didn't want the message to be, go back in the closet, hide because they're coming for you. I wanted the message to be that no matter what spaces they try to invade, no matter how they try to come for us and who we are, we build safety together, that our community is stronger than all of that. I wanted that to be the message. And I think that's what drove me to want to be so involved in the aftermath.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you talked about kind of the community rallying together. And obviously, unfortunately, Pulse has been back in the headlines recently with the removal of the memorial, the crossing that was outside the club. As a survivor of that night and someone who was so closely connected to this, how does it feel to have that memorial erased? And then on the other hand, and I know police are now trying to stop this, what does it mean to you to witness the community coming together and rallying to kind of reinstate it, right? They're chalking it in, they're painting it in. Like, what does that mean as well?
Well, it's about so much more than paint on the ground, right? A space like that is sacred. It's a space like that is hallowed ground. It is the place I feel closest to the people who were stolen from me. It is the place that I can hear the last words we said to each other, that I can see their smiles, that I can feel their hugs. And so when it is desecrated by politicians who are looking for clickbait or a moment to own the libs, it is so incredibly offensive and hurtful. And I think every one of those politicians should be ashamed of themselves that they have used this space as a political sideshow instead of treating it with the reverence and the respect that it deserves. I will also say it's infuriating to me that the person, Governor Ron DeSantis, is the person who has made this the flashpoint in the state of Florida, aided by his friend in the White House, Donald Trump. It is infuriating to me that Ron DeSantis is the person who has, at every turn, not just targeted LGBTQ plus people, but done nothing, lifted no finger to help survivors and family members of the Pulse nightclub tragedy. In 2021, Ron DeSantis, for instance, vetoed $150,000 in funding for mental health support for survivors of the Pulse nightclub tragedy. He slashed that entire line from the budget. But you can imagine with 6 or 8 state troopers outside, with arrests happening, with them babysitting it overnight, he has spent far more than that babysitting a crosswalk outside the building. And it again, it is so offensive that there are people who have not gotten the resources they need, that there are people who have not gotten the justice they need, and instead this governor is pouring money into babysitting a crosswalk, paying a bunch of cops to sit on the hoods of their cars, instead of doing the hard work of repairing the wounds that are still open in this community. So that's, without going on a diatribe, that's how I feel about the crosswalk. That's how I feel about what's happening in the governor's mansion. I have a lot of feelings about Donald Trump that go beyond just the crosswalk. I will say what has been inspiring was the second part of your question, which is this resistance, this resilience inside the community. And it's not just at the Pulse crosswalk. I know that people have chalked it and repainted it and come face to face with law enforcement there, but it's about how the whole community has responded. It's about the small business owners who've opened their parking lots and asked people to come and paint rainbow spaces there. It's, about the bar Savoy. I saw the bar Savoy put a big rainbow mural in all of the windows in front of the bar. It's about people putting up a pride flag for the first time or putting a sticker on their car for the first time. It's about people saying that one bucket of black paint can't erase us. And we're going to take your assault on this memorial and make it a million rainbows across the state of Florida and across the country that you can never erase. So I've been so inspired. And to be honest, that's the Orlando I know. That's the queer community I know, a community that refuses to be erased, refuses to be silenced, and responds to these things by showing up more boldly and unapologetically than ever before.
Yeah, I agree. It does feel incredibly, it's clearly incredibly personal, obviously to someone like yourself, but across the entire community, especially the community in Florida, especially the community in the US right now. I've been saying recently that it felt like the way that we're treating the LGBTQ plus community today feels very much like a throwback to how things were in the 80s and 90s when you think about how the gay community, specifically in the lesbian community, were treated in that time. And I like to think that all those people at some point are going to be proven to be on the wrong side of history, right? Like at some point we're going to look back on the same way we look back at how we treated the LGBTQ plus community in the 80s and 90s, with the same kind of disdain for how they're treating the community as a whole, but very specifically the transgender and non-binary parts of the community. As someone that's clearly a lot closer to the American politics side of things, do you think that's right? Do you think there will come a time when we look back on this with that level of disgust that we do look back on the 80s and 90s?
Absolutely. People who ban books and censor curriculum and tear flags down, they're never on the right side of history. It only takes time before eventually we have an honest dialogue about the harm that they've caused. And I will just say that at every major inflection point in the queer rights movement in the United States, at least, people continued to fight even though the odds were against them. And the end result was a world that progressed far beyond their wildest imaginations, right? So you think about the Stonewall uprising in the 1960s and how that launched a movement and began, what we know to be pride festivals across the country today. It was met with backlash. In the 1970s, the right wing came in and started waging national campaigns saying that gay people couldn't be teachers because being around children posed a threat, and they were trying to ban gay people from even being hired as teachers. But the people who were fighting at that time continued to fight because they knew that it was worth it. They could not have imagined that in a few short decades, not only would gay people certainly be teachers, but they would be parents, they would be husbands and wives and partners, they would be, like CEOs. They could not have imagined that that was the movement they were building. You think about people during the HIV and AIDS crisis when things were at the height of pain and trauma and struggle. And they fought anyway, even though the odds were stacked against them, even though, under Ronald Reagan, the United States government was not even going to acknowledge what was happening to the community, was going to sweep it under the rug. They continued to fight anyway because they knew the fight was worth it. I don't think they could have imagined that in a few short decades, we would have medication to prevent people from contracting HIV, and it would be government subsidized so you could get it for basically free across the country. Like, they didn't know that was the movement they were building, but it was the movement they were building because it was worth it. And, marriage equality is the same. I told you that when I was in high school, states were banning same-sex marriage across the country. It was an unpopular issue to say that you believe everyone should be able to marry the person they love. And people continued to fight anyway at that time, knowing that love is powerful and true and right. And they were just going to keep fighting for what was right, even if they couldn't have imagined that in 2022, President Joe Biden with Cyndi Lauper on stage would be signing federal legislation to protect people's marriages, right? I think we're in another one of those inflection points where the odds are stacked against us. the right wing is emboldened and pushing back, but we're going to look back on this decades from now and realize not only were we right, but we were building the kind of movement that was going to propel us beyond our wildest dreams.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we need, across every country, we need people like yourself who have had that kind of fire lit in them to fight for the community. And obviously, in the Pulse nightclub shooting, you lost two incredible friends, and that really came across in the book, Drew and Juan. I got to hear more about their lives through the book and kind of hear stories, very specifically about Drew and kind of the relationship you had with them both. But what is a story or memory that you could give to all of us that would give us an kind of instant sense of the people they were and how you would want us to think about them?
Oh my gosh, there are way too many stories that help to illustrate who they were. But, one of my favorite stories is one that I wrote in the book, which is about going on vacation for New Year's Eve. And that was one of Drew's favorite things. Well, he loved holidays because he was very cheesy and everything was always themed and like, decor and costumes, and that's so antithetical to who I am. But you play along because it's your best friend and, it makes him happy. So when Eurovision party came along, we would all come with our little ballots and, play along, play the game. But New Year's Eve in particular was really special to Drew, I think, because it marked a moment to celebrate friendship. And I could think of nothing more important to him than friendship. So we would go, sometimes stay in Orlando and find a cool place to go out, or we'd travel. And in this particular year, we were in Fort Lauderdale. And everything about it had gone wrong. I mean, it was like he had planned a beautiful trip and the wheels came off. We got to our hotel and it was, roach infested, smelled like cigarette smoke in every room. You look out the window and it was like not a safe part of town for us to be in. And, the dinner reservations, like, I don't think there were enough seats for everyone who'd been reserved for. So everything about this trip had gone totally wrong. And yet we had the time of our lives because Drew made it the time of our lives. You could tell that he was frustrated that his plan had not worked to perfection. But the fact that that only made him go to 110% of trying to create the vibe for everyone in the group. He spent the entire night making sure everyone had the best time of their lives. And so, of course, we woke up the next day late, feeling very hungover. I, looked over, Drew was not in his bed as I wandered down to try to find some coffee, and he was sitting all alone outside in the courtyard of this very seedy motel next to a skeleton mannequin that was dressed like a pirate and sitting quietly. And so I sat next to him in this little lounge chair. We sat there in silence for some time, and I wrote about the power of silence and realizing in that moment that this was maybe the only friend I had that I could sit in silence with, because without it saying any words, we were saying enough. Eventually he broke the silence and he said, "I want you to know you're my best friend." And I was like, "Okay, sure, girl." I know you're going through it, but like, we don't have to do all that. And he said, "No, I am being serious. I know people throw that word around a lot, but I really want you to know that you are my best friend and I love you a lot." And so that whole trip for me, him trying to do the most, the wheels coming off, and that only making him do even more to try to make sure everyone had a good time, the power of us being able to sit in silence the next morning and not have to say anything. And finally, when he breaks the silence, it's to tell me and reassure me, "You are my best friend in the world and I will ride or die for you." Like, that for me encapsulates exactly who Drew was.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. And as you say, that ability to kind of sit in silence with someone is a true sign of a level of comfort. And it was something definitely that came across in the book, was that it felt like Drew was this kind of centerpiece to a ton of friendship circles. And he was someone that would bring a lot of people together. And obviously that's what we all want. We need that person. I'm not that person, but we need that person in the friendship group that's going to pull everyone together.
I'm the one who he would always say, "You need to fix your face." That was my contribution to the group, was like, "Your face is doing the thing again. Can you please fix it?" So people will want to stick around.
And you need someone who'll tell you that as well. That's also
He sure did.
In the aftermath of that night, and as you kind of process that, you wrote about this in the book, that you made a promise to Drew that you would fight for a world that he would be proud of. This is maybe a really difficult question to answer, but what does that world look like? And maybe the even harder part of that question, and what does the work look like for us to achieve that?
Yeah, I really stepped in it with that one because it is a big promise. That was a profound moment for me. And part of the reason that I was so proud to be able to write a book is that I could go into depth about, the color and texture around some of those stories. Like these are stories that I've told before, but I've never gotten to, tell them long form. And writing a book allowed me the space to really give you the meat and bones around it. And so this promise that I made came at his funeral service, and it was right after I had this like internal dialogue with God where I was so angry. I was full of rage about what had happened and how unfair it was. And at the same time was so compelled to want to do something to honor him, to provide him some ounce of justice. And so it just sort of came out. I will never stop fighting for a world that you will be proud of. And I've said from the very beginning, the reason the book is dedicated to Drew, the reason there's a whole chapter titled Drew, by the way, he would love those things. That would be the greatest gift to him in the world, is that I think actually, now that I've been on Earth for some time, I think I've never been the protagonist in my own story. I think that Drew was always the protagonist and I was the narrator. And it just took us some time to find each other. And so I say all of that because I felt a sense of duty, of obligation to carry that story forward. And for me, the world that Drew would be proud of, the story that I'm carrying forward is one where everybody gets to be themselves, unapologetically, authentically, where everyone has a space that they can call safe, where everyone has the kind of family they deserve, where everyone has the chance to be their fullest, richest, selves and live the life, the kind of normal life they've been told they don't get to live. That's a world that he can be proud of. Now, that comes with a whole lot of accoutrement. Like, that means we have to end gun violence in America. It means we have to end homophobia, transphobia, all the phobias across the world. It means, we have to make sure that everybody has enough food to eat, enough water to drink, that they have physical safety from war and violence. It's a lot of things, the world that he would be proud of, because quite frankly, a world that Drew would be proud of is a world all of us can be proud of. And that's really tough work. But the way I see it is that it was never a promise solely meant for me. It was a commitment to do that work alongside everyone else. And I can't save the world on my own. If I tried, I would fail today. But what I can do is play my part. And so, that promise to Drew at the funeral service led to me leaving my life at Starbucks, going into advocacy work full time. I'm now doing that work on a national scale. And I've said throughout that journey, I don't care so much anymore about the title. I don't care so much anymore about the white picket fence, the little condo in Seattle, the 2.5 kids or a Suburban. What I care about is being in the place where I can have the greatest impact. And today I am in the place where I can have an immense impact. And I'm so proud to do that work.
Yeah, and we're all obviously incredibly thankful that there are people like yourself who are doing that work. The one thing that always strikes me, though, is that's a lot to take on, right? To have gone so quickly, seemingly from personal grief and trauma to public advocacy.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that? And how do you refill your own cup, restore your energy, and take care of you whilst doing all that work?
Well, if you figure that out, balance, let me know, because I'd love to know. No, I think it's a journey. I think, to be in this work is to be learning how to demand your own value in the world, because whether we like it or not, and I certainly don't like it, we live in a world, in a society that tells us we are only as valuable as what we can produce, that, our value is working 9 to 5 every day and pouring into an economy that is the engine for, each of our nations, that's our value. And that rest and relaxation and vacation, that those things are selfish and don't add value. In that kind of society, in that kind of world, declaring that you are of value simply because you're a human being is radical. And part of my journey has been learning to say that unapologetically, that I am of value, not simply because I survived a tragedy, not simply because I, work hard every day to try to make the world a better place, not simply because I can give a good speech on a stage. I am of value because I'm a human being. And that means that all the things I do are of value. When I sit and watch a college football game on Saturday, that is of value. When I decide to take a nap on a Sunday afternoon, that is of value. When I build relationships with my friends and my family, when I pour into them the same kind of love that I poured into the work that I do, that is of value too. And only when you accept that you are of value because of everything you bring to the table, can you truly find and celebrate balance. I no longer see rest and joy and relaxation as a nice to have when I get a moment, but as necessary to the work. Because, I've said for the last few years, I don't think there's any point in fighting for joy and liberation if you don't get to experience joy and liberation along the way. So I have a lot of ways that I experience joy and liberation. I love to travel. This is another hot take. I prefer solo travel over group travel. So I very often will, put in some PTO and I'm like, I'm leaving the country by myself for a few days and I'm just gone. And I enjoy good wine, good food, new company. I recently bought a home, so I guess I'm finding joy in figuring out what drill bit is supposed to go in the drill. But I find a lot of joy and balance in life, the normalcy of life, the banality of life, and in the relationships that I have with other people, in my chosen family and my friends and my colleagues. And I really, really treat that joy, that balance as precious as much as I can.
Yeah, I think that's such an important message, especially in the kind of the culture that we have today, that, that ability to switch off, that ability to take time for you is how you recharge, and it will make you a better person in every aspect of your work.
Yeah. And just again, even if it isn't solely to recharge for the work that you're going to do, the rest, the relaxation, the pouring into yourself is value add on its own, right? That you can show up to the world as a whole human being, that you have, things to offer that are not just rooted in your labor, that you are demonstrating to other people that they can be unshackled from this idea that they're only as valuable as their labor. Those things are of real value. And I want to encourage people. I want you to break free of the idea of seeing relaxation and joy and pouring into yourself as just a way to fill the gas tank so you can spend it somewhere else. It is value add simply because you being a whole person on this earth and giving other people permission to do that is value add.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a really important message. I feel like I need to reflect a little bit on how I view going on vacation with my husband.
Go on vacation just because it's great to go on vacation.
Yeah. Obviously, when you go on vacation, you are taking time away from what you now do, which is press secretary for the Human Rights Campaign, which is this incredible organization. I hope everyone knows about it. They should definitely do research if they don't. And you're also a regular voice in the national conversation in the US. With what feels like this kind of endless wave of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation, raids, executive orders, how can progressive Americans keep going and keep fighting back?
Oof. Well, once again, if you have the answer, let me know, because things are rough out here. Yeah, this feels so timely to me because so I mentioned I got a new place that I've been, this is like a dream come true. I've been working at this for a very long time. So really thrilled that I get to live that American dream for myself. But I also happen to own in one of the neighborhoods that is federally occupied at the moment and has a heavy presence of, National Guard troops, FBI, ICE, certainly local police, and there are raids every single day. And so I say it's timely because this week I witnessed 2 different ICE raids in a single day. And there is a level of trauma and grief that happens that I don't think people are totally prepared for until they've been in those situations. And I can't even imagine what the people who have been taken and their families are going through. And so I've been reflecting a lot in the last couple of days on how do we go on in this moment. Because the truth is that people like Donald Trump, people across the right wing, their aim is to sap you of hope. Their aim is to light a million fires so you can't figure out where to start and you give up. That is the goal of this strategy. And giving up is not an option. We can't give up on our country. We can't give up on each other. We can't give up on the people we love. I think the path forward is in regrounding ourselves in our superpowers. One of those superpowers is organizing one-to-one. I think in the age of social media, we get so caught up in the big macro organizing that we lose sight of the power of like one-to-one interpersonal community organizing, which is the most important work we have to do. So I would encourage people to get engaged in your community, to meet people face to face if you can, to have a coffee with them, to join a local group, to do something with human beings that is not behind a screen, that is not in the comments section, that builds real, actual solidarity in your community. Because when you tap back into that humanity, you realize how much power exists in it, right? So that would be one of the things I would encourage people to do. The right wing's been doing that for a very long time, and it's why they've built so much power across this country. And the other thing I would say is one of our greatest superpowers is telling our stories. And I know that can sound, maybe Pollyannish in this moment, but the truth is that all of the right wing's agenda is made easier when we lose sight of each other as human beings, right? When they dehumanize our neighbors so much that we lose sight of who they really are, then it's easier for them to throw them in the back of a car, put a hood over their head, and disappear them to a prison cell in El Salvador, never to be seen again, right? They need us to lose touch with our humanity. And the only way to get back in touch with it is to share our stories, to see each other, again, fully, authentically, unapologetically. And so I would just dare people to be that vulnerable, to share your story, to share the stories of the people around you, the people you love, to demand that people in this country and around the world don't look away, that they see the fullness of what we're talking about, that they don't become desensitized to it. So I don't have all the answers. I wish I could solve this crisis tomorrow and maybe rescue our democracy in the meantime. But what I do know is that we have superpowers and they're grounded in humanity and community, and we need those things right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things that you've testified on before Congress and advocated for is common sense gun laws. As a Brit, clearly, I'm never going to quite be able to comprehend the attachment that many Americans have to their guns, especially when you consider just the sheer number of mass shootings that happen on a regular basis. And the reason I think of it is because you said about desensitization. I think there is this danger of being desensitized to these mass shootings, that they just become part of life when you look around the rest of the world and it's just not the case. But today, in many ways, as an outsider looking in, it feels like we are, or the US is further away from common sense gun law than ever before. So, and maybe this is going to be another one of those, if you know the answer to that, tell me. Is change possible from that perspective? And if so, kind of how?
Well, yes, change is possible. And I would push back a little bit to say that we've actually made more progress on the legislative front around gun safety in the last 5 to 10 years than we have in a very long time. And what I mean by that is, a couple of examples. In 2018, after the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, a group of teenagers launched a nationwide movement that took people by storm. And ultimately, it led to Florida passing its first gun safety laws in over 20 years. Florida instituted a red flag law and extreme risk protection order that can separate people from their guns when they're in a state of crisis. Florida also raised the minimum age of purchase for weapons to 21. So a bunch of things happened in the wake of that tragedy that were actual real change-making items. And as a result, the red flag law in Florida has been used thousands of times to save people's lives. So that's an example of change that has happened just in the last 7 years. In the midterm election cycle immediately following that, explosion of support for gun safety legislation, Moms Demand Action, the gun violence prevention movement, spent more on candidates and elected more candidates to Congress than the NRA and the gun lobby. So that feels like a shift. That was the first time that, basically NRA-backed candidates lost head-to-head with people who said out loud, we should have common sense gun safety reforms. That's a big win. And then, come 2020, Joe Biden comes along and runs for president on arguably the most progressive gun safety platform that this country had seen in a very long time and gets elected, right? If you look back to when Pulse happened, Hillary Clinton was told by basically every establishment person that she could not run on gun safety. She could not run on an assault weapons ban because she would lose the election, right? That was the political climate we were in. And then you get to 2020, Joe Biden saying those things out loud, he gets elected, and he helps to sign into law the nation's first gun safety protections in over 20 years. So I'm giving you this long context because I think that people lose sight of what change actually looks and feels like in democracy. I want the headline. I want the New York Times headline, assault weapons and high-capacity magazines banned in the United States of America. But that's not the only barometer for success. I think we've made a ton of progress on public sentiment. I think we've made a lot of progress on the money front around the gun lobby. I think we've made some legislative progress. The question is, when we really break down that door, when we get the next president who's willing to take bold action on this, are we ready to ask for what we really need to make a difference in this country?
Yeah, that's super useful context. I think, as you say, it's easy to lose sight of that. And especially as myself, as an outsider, I think probably we don't get as much context. And you mentioned kind of the next president, you mentioned Joe Biden, and maybe you can't or won't want to answer this, but I get this feeling when I talk to you, when I hear you speak, that I might be talking to a future senator, congressman, maybe even president. Do you have those sort of political aspirations? And could you see yourself running for some kind of office?
I'd never say never, but this is the worst because it's going to sound like a politician answer. But I promise it's genuine. I talked about how my perspective changed in the wake of Pulse. And for me, truly, title doesn't matter, right? And the role doesn't necessarily matter. I'm looking for impact. I want to know, where can you deploy me to have the greatest impact today? Where can you deploy me that will do the greatest good today? And I will do that job. I worked in Florida for 5 years doing basically what I do now, but on a statewide level. And I was so thrilled to be having that impact. People asked me all the time when I was down there, like, is it time? Are you going to run? And I would say, I am doing the greatest amount of good I can do right now in this job. And I want to do that job. So again, I'm sorry that it's kind of a politician-y answer. I will never say never. I've certainly thought about what it would look like to have an impact from an elected position. But for me, it is about impact. And I'm going to go where I'm needed to provide the greatest value, to make the greatest good. And I think I get to do an incredible amount of good in the job that I'm in right now. And I'm so honored to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I can't vote, but you'd get my vote, just putting it out there.
Thanks.
Right.
For any right-wingers listening, we're not encouraging Brits to vote in the United States, I promise.
Okay, that's a good flag. Right, we started this conversation talking about young Brandon. So I want to revisit him. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be? And would it be different if I said, what advice would you give to young queer LGBTQ plus people today?
And the answer to the second question is no. It would be the same advice. And the advice I would give myself and every young person out there is be you. Don't ask for permission. Don't apologize. Don't shrink. Don't mute. Don't shave the edges down. Don't try to assimilate into someone else's idea of who you are supposed to be. You are exactly who you are supposed to be. You are of value exactly as you are. You are loved exactly as you are. And I don't want to see you wait too long to discover that your greatest superpower is being unapologetically yourself.
Amazing advice. That's incredibly important. I hope everyone listens to that. Brandon, thank you so much for being on Queer Talker with me, but thank you more for all the incredible work you do, even as a Brit looking in from the outside. It's so important that people like you exist and that people like you are out there fighting continuously for the rights of people like me. So I just really appreciate you for all your work and for being on the podcast with me today.
Thank you. Anytime. Proud to do it.
Queer Talker.